We're here in Kuwait at the offices of Ahli Bank of Kuwait with the bank's Chief Executive Officer and Chief General Manager, Michel Accad. Michel, if we could start not in Kuwait, but in Egypt. In 2015, you took over Piraeus Bank Egypt, rebranded it to Ahli Bank of Kuwait Egypt. That transformed this bank from a domestic player to a regional player. What are the next steps?
Well, we always had for the past several years a small presence outside of Kuwait. So we had a couple of branches in the UAE, but they accounted for less than 5% of our top line and our bottom line. With the acquisition in Egypt, we've become much more of a regional bank, because Egypt alone accounts today for a bit more than 10%, of our numbers. So today, our structure is more 85-15 between local and regional. Of course, over time, we would like this the split to be perhaps closer to a 70-30, but this is going to take obviously a few years. But that is our aspiration, that we would be primarily a Kuwaiti bank, but with a significant regional presence.
You talk about growing that regional presence and growing its importance as part of the bank's balance sheet. Are you going to achieve that through growth in what you've already got in the UAE and Egypt, or are you looking at other countries as well?
I don't think that in the relatively short term it's achievable on a purely organic basis. Now, obviously, the acquisition in Egypt will grow, or the bank in Egypt will grow faster than our operations in Kuwait. But nevertheless, I feel that most of the growth will probably come from inorganically, from either further acquisition, if not of a bank or something, but perhaps of portfolios or asset acquisitions.
All right, let's look at the domestic sector then. We'll come back to what's happening in Egypt in a moment. But with regards to the Kuwaiti banking sector, what do you see as the key trends this year and next?
Well, the Kuwaiti banks have generally performed, or Kuwait in general has performed better than the other GCC countries. That's simply due to their, let's say, greater fiscal discipline and their ability to sustain lower oil prices than many of the surrounding countries. So Kuwait is, at a slight advantage. So if Kuwait is at a slight advantage as a country, so are its banks. So as banks, we have been performing in Kuwait a bit better than elsewhere in the GCC. Nevertheless, the growth is obviously single digit, and there is no question that the slowdown or the reduction in oil prices has impacted the economy and obviously the banking system.
Well, I'm going to take perhaps issue with what you said there, because back in August of 2017, Fitch Ratings commented, and I quote, that large asset liability mismatches remain among Kuwait's banks. Would you agree with that? And if you do agree with it, is it a cause for concern?
I agree with that completely. I don't know if it's a feature that is exclusive to Kuwait or is more a regional feature. Maybe Kuwait has a little bit more of this mismatch. However, certain banks, and we the first actually, have remedied in large part to this situation through issues of bonds. So we were the first Kuwaiti bank to issue a senior bond after the government of Kuwait issued its debut senior issue. So we're very pleased with the result, and it has indeed actually rebalanced our asset and liability maturity in a much better way.
Yeah, you've actually answered one of my other questions there, or begun to answer one of my other questions in terms of the bond, because this was actually your debut issue, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and it was extremely successful. The international market, it was sold internationally in Western Europe, in Asia, and in the Middle East, and it was very well received. The pricing was extremely attractive.
Now, you've got a number of issues still to tackle, not least changes in accounting practice. We have the proposed implementation of IFRS 9 in the financial sector as of the 1st of January 2018. Do you foresee any problems there?
No, I don't. I don't foresee any problem for us as Ahli Bank, ABK. But in general, I don't foresee any problem for all or most of the Kuwaiti banks either. That is because the Kuwaiti banks have accumulated precautionary reserves in relatively large amounts, and that are more than sufficient. Actually, they're a multiple of what is that would be probably required under an IFRS 9 scenario. In fact, we did run already a simulation, and it seems that as far as we're concerned, that the extra provisions that are required under IFRS 9 would be around 10% of those precautionary reserves that we already have. So the impact would be minimal, if any.
Okay, let's turn back to Egypt again then. You talk about growth there, and obviously it's a different marketplace to Kuwait. Can we explore how different? It's obviously a much bigger marketplace. So what do you see as the key differences between the business in Kuwait and the business in Egypt?
Well, we've got to be realistic. If a country provides you with a significantly faster growth than another country, then obviously the risk is also higher. So yes, the risk is obviously higher. But Egypt is also a very much an underbanked market. So that's why there are many more opportunities for growth in various sectors. While if you look at Kuwait, Kuwait is very adequately banked. So it's difficult to, if you want, gain market share.
The growth potential is not here in the way that it is in...
Absolutely, because here the growth potential means that if you want to grow market share, you need to steal it from somebody else. In Egypt, no, there's a lot of untapped market, and therefore it makes it much easier to grow.
I want to delve into some of the nitty-gritty of banking now and banking in the future, and I'm going to start with what you've been doing for the last few days. You've had an exciting couple of days. Just before we sit down to do this interview, perhaps you'd care to discuss the project that's just been brought to fruition and your new core banking system.
Sure. Actually, an extremely exciting time. We've just migrated to a new core banking system. Now, I mean, many banks migrate, upgrade, or change system. There's nothing new in that. But as far as we're concerned, our system was getting rather antiquated. It's not that the system itself was bad, but it was like 3 versions old. And then it was so heavy with customization, it wasn't close to the original anymore. So even an upgrade of the old system would have required significant work. But what we did was that we moved to even a completely different system. We had actually, the move was over the weekend. It involved a large number of people, and many of them actually did not have a lot of sleep during that time. But to be honest, it is the smoothest transition I've ever seen. First, we've been working on this transition for, let's say, about 18 months. The transition came in about 1 month earlier than planned, and under the budget that was planned. So I think that is a pretty unique situation as far as I'm concerned. Today is the first day the system is operating, and we've had, barely a few, minor issues. We're expecting actually much more normal issues, teething problem. But it has gone so incredibly smoothly, I'm almost worried it's gone too well.
Perhaps just because you've said such nice things about it, I will mention that this was Infosys Finacle that you
yes, right. It's Infosys Finacle, and it's one of the top 2 or 3 systems worldwide for banks. And we're very happy with the support that we've received from the vendors on this one. They made all that possible.
Now, in terms of what that's going to do for you in the future, and that specifically is core banking, but you've taken on a whole suite of products. So the next few questions I want to ask are about how this is going to affect banking, and it's also about how your customers, both your corporate customers and your individual customers, expect to do business. And I'd like to start there, because people are migrating away from the traditional form of banking. This is something that's been going on for years. Is there a role still for a bank branch, though?
Well, to answer that question directly, yes, there still is. I think we would make a mistake if the idea is to move away from branches and all into digital channels or other type of channels. I think what has happened already and what will continue to happen, maybe at an accelerated pace, is that the alternative channel will take a greater and greater will play a greater and greater role going forward. But the branch is not going to disappear. Now, maybe if a new bank were to start from scratch, it would do it with a minimum number of branches. But I have somehow the feeling that for the next maybe couple of decades, you will still need a significant number of branches to make a difference. But I'd like to add as well as on some of the capabilities of the system, it would allow us actually a much smoother transition towards the digital channels. So of course, all banks have online banking and mobile banking. Even we, under the old system, had actually a very nice mobile banking from a customer viewpoint. But it wasn't straight through processing.
No, this is the thing, isn't it? There's two aspects to banking. One is the customer experience, and you can have a great customer interface, but then lots of people running around furiously, still with little bits of paper, in the back office.
I think you really put your finger into it. That was our situation before. That people viewed our system, from a client perspective, wow, what a smooth system. But behind it, you had tens of people running around and inputting the transaction. Now it is really straight through. That's it. There's no more that sort of intervention. So that's actually almost revolutionary as far as we're concerned, of course.
Well, in fact, one other banker, not in Kuwait, in another country completely, did cite to me, and I don't think it was original to him. In fact, he said it wasn't. But there is a saying going the rounds that banking is going to change more in the next 10 years than it has in the last 100. And I think a lot of that's to do not just with the customer interface and what the customer wants, but how the bank itself operates within its own four walls.
Well, yes, but it doesn't only apply to banks. I think since the Industrial Revolution, it applies to everything else. I mean, think of mobile phone a few years back and today we can't live with them. I do think that, the next 10 years are going to see, in the banking system, you're right, much more changes than the previous 100. But as I said, don't limit it to banks. It's everything else that we do. I think that's how nature is now.
Let me just bring it back to banks. These changes we've been talking about, do they give opportunities for new product areas for the bank to grow in, as well as improving the way the existing product set is treated?
Yes, although rather than products, I would rather use the word channels, because products can be there anyway, and you can, or many products you can still access through the branch system. But the channels and the way you access them, and the if you want, friendliness or smoothness of how, or seamlessness of how you acquire and sell those products, I think that will make the difference. Of course, there'll also be new products and new ways, but I think it's more in how they are delivered rather than in different products.
I'm going to take that a stage further, if I may, because there is competition coming for banks, and the competition is perhaps coming from places people don't realize it may. First of all, you have things like cryptocurrencies, which are going to have all kinds of implications for the traditional monetary system. Yes. And also you have competition, frankly, from retailers, the likes of Amazon, for example. And not least because of the way people deal with Amazon. They deal with Amazon in an omni-channel way. They deal with Amazon in a straight-through processing way. Now, we've talked about straight-through processing, but you have to be omni-channel as well. And you have to be that 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Omnichannel and omniproduct, when you look at
Yes.
Amazon, they're everywhere. They're actually my favorite company, but
Well, it's just one example, but people have for example, a great experience retail. They're going to expect that great experience with their bank as well.
yes, I do believe, in fact, that you're right, that the key competition for us is not going to come from other banks, but it's going to come from retailers and other that will offer products that are very similar to ours, and maybe more efficiently, maybe faster, maybe with less control, because they're not controlled directly by the regulatory authorities the same way as banks are controlled, because banks are also carry deposits on behalf of the public. So yes, this will be our most challenging competition that we will face. On the other hand, you mentioned cryptocurrency. Personally, I'm not necessarily a believer in that. Well, some people have mentioned, oh yeah, maybe it's a big Ponzi scheme. I'm not sure I'll go that far, but I don't think that the key competition, at least in the next decade, will come from there. I think it's going to come more from the retail side.
Okay, so what right now for ABK and into the medium and longer term, what are the top priorities for the bank?
Well, if I take a look at ABK, what we've worked on very hard was our strategy about being simplicity, making our clients' life much easier, and I think we've moved a long way towards this. I mean, if you want to open an account with ABK, you'd find the process much smoother, much faster than most of the other banks, and yet we do not give an inch, in terms of know your customer and compliance and so on. But I'm sure, because we believe that there are ways to do certain things behind the scene, not seen necessarily directly by the customer. So simplicity is one of the things where we'll continue to focus on. The other, key theme for us is going to be, and I think that brings me back to your first question, which is being more of a regional bank, having branches or banks outside Kuwait contributing more and more to our revenues going forward. So these would be a couple of key priorities for us, which is continuing the drive to simplicity, moving more on a regional basis, and of course you mentioned as well the channels. So all banks, not just us, will have to adapt and become more and more digital and rely a bit less on the physical branches. So in other words, we have between 30 and 40 branches in Kuwait and the same in Egypt. Yes, in Egypt maybe there's a bit room for growth in terms of branches. In Kuwait, I don't think, maybe there's one or two in certain areas that would be interested. But overall, I don't foresee growth in the physical branches, but growth will come from other channels, and that will help us deliver the bottom line to our shareholders.
Finally, and there is a finality to this question. You are actually on record as describing this job as your last job, the last job of your career. What ambitions do you still hope to achieve?
Well, to be honest, even the previous job, I had described it as the last job in my career, but I think I'm reaching an age group where this really has to be the last. But what made...
Don't say that, it's not grey, it's natural blonde.
Yes, of course, absolutely. But what makes it so interesting is that it is actually a transformational strategy that we are following for ABK. ABK used to be a rather, let's say, very conservative bank, not doing, a lot of things new. The strategy was undifferentiated. Now we really are viewed completely differently by the market, and I think I think and hope that we will continue to surprise the market and continue to differentiate ourselves significantly from the competition. So the new core banking system for us is transformational. The acquisition in Egypt is transformational. And what I think that is over the next 6 months, there's going to be another couple of transformational either transaction or initiatives that we'll be implementing.
Which you obviously can't tell me about right now.
Of course I can't.
Michel Accad, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.